All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, thank you all for joining today. We've got our first session of TestRocker Parent Q&A. So, what we want to do with this session is to talk to you all about some common questions, help you navigate this process that you're either just beginning or you're getting into in a more earnest way, depending on how old your son or daughter is. So what we wanted to do was just take some of the common questions that we get and share those with you and share some answers that we provide on a regular basis so you have an idea and you're given proper instruction on how to go forward with the process. So to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Michael Henry. I've been with TestRocker for over 5 years now, and I've worked with parents, students, educators of all kinds over the course of that time. And I've seen and heard a lot of different things, so I want to try to impart some of that wisdom to you so that we can hopefully make this process a little bit easier for you. So what we also want you to do is we're going to be doing these TestRocker live Q&A sessions regularly. So make sure that you're clicking on the little dots in the top right corner to share with anyone you think might be interested. It's something that we're trying to provide as much information to make this easier for you, and that's what these sessions are for. So if you have any questions as we're going along, we're going to start with some more common questions that I've gotten in the past. So I'll start with those. But if you have questions along the way, please feel free to send those through in the chat box, and I'll be sure to get those addressed. So I guess we'll just get started with the first question. So most common question I get is, when should my child start preparing? So this is a little bit different kind of question because depending on when you become aware of this piece of the process, it can seem like maybe you're behind or ahead or too early, really, really late. What I want you all to kind of set your mind at ease is no matter where you are, no matter how old your son or daughter is, there's always some way to address this. So first and foremost, something to be aware of and really an important piece is what's covered on the test are things that your kids are seeing in school at different times. So a lot of it depends on what math classes your kids are taking. What's covered on both the SAT and the ACT exam is algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and then a little bit of trig and higher level math, which is more like the end of algebra 2. So whenever your students or your kids are taking those classes, it's not a bad thing to start incorporating some kind of prep for these tests, because while it's fresh in your mind, you want to make sure that you're maintaining that understanding. What I see way too often is students will take those classes freshman or sophomore year of high school, and then by the time these tests roll around and they start taking them junior year, it's something that they're having to go back and relearn all of these different subjects. So you want to try your best to keep it steady, keep it consistent. And that kind of leads into, how you can take or how you can plan for this test. So along those lines, I get a question a lot of times about, when is the best time for my child to take the test? So those kinds of discussions are really dependent on your individual situation. But what you can do is these test scores don't expire. So you can take these tests even in 9th grade if your son or daughter feels confident with it and they've been exposed to everything that's covered on the test. They can take them 9th grade. Those scores will apply when your applications roll around senior year. Now, that being said, the vast majority of students aren't taking it in ninth grade unless they're just trying to get familiar with it and you want to do like a test run, really just to get the feel for what going and sitting for one of those tests looks like. So what what I would recommend is you look at what your students are doing in the classroom and supplement preparation that kind of corresponds to the classes that they're taking. Like I said, for those that Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, those classes, it's kind of how you want to pick that starting point. So from there, sorry, I'm just reading comments here. Okay, great. So yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next biggest question that we get, which is which test should my child take? One of the things that you're probably aware of from either having older kids or you've heard from older parents, or I guess parents of older kids, that there was a drastic difference between the SAT and the ACT, and my child might do better on one versus the other. And I want to be able to give them the best opportunity to set their best foot forward. So what's happened over the last few years is the SAT made sweeping changes a few years ago to actually more resemble the ACT. Something that we do at TestRocker, we've got a great resource that's our SAT versus ACT self-assessment. You can find that in our free resources page on our blog. And it's a short questionnaire, and it gives you a sense of, do I really strongly lean in one direction versus the other? So the major differences, there's really two. So first, on the ACT, there's a science section that's broken out and completely separate. So one of the things that is commonly, I guess, that parents are worried about is I know that my child is not great in science, so I'm going to avoid the ACT because of that. That's not necessarily a reason why you should avoid it. Mainly because the science section doesn't require any prior knowledge going into it. So it's not like it's going to be testing you on specific biology or chemistry questions that they might have taken in class before. The science section on the ACT is actually more of kind of like a mixture of the SAT or the reading section and the math section. So it's just providing you reading comprehension and the ability to interpret graphs, charts, tables, things like that. So that's the one big structural difference that is always, the first question about which test I should take. The other one is that the SAT is more reading intensive. So there's just more words that you have to get through. So if your child's not necessarily the fastest reader, that might be an indication that you could do better on the ACT. Like I said before, they're very similar now. So what we try to dispel with our SAT versus ACT self-assessment is the fact that you're likely to do just as well on one as you would on the other. That's the vast majority of students now. So to put a lot of time and effort into figuring out which test you need to be taking is not necessarily, it's not a waste of time, but that time could be spent doing other things like preparing. So really, we think it boils down more to how am I planning this out to give my child the best opportunity to succeed. And by that I mean, are you planning at certain points in the year where maybe their course load isn't as heavy, maybe they're athletes and they're in season and they're going to practice every day after school, so it's a lot to juggle when you're going to practice, you're trying to do your homework. So being able to slot it into the year in the best way to include test prep and include practice time for these tests is what's ultimately going to give you the best chance to put your best foot forward on either one of these exams. These are also things that at TestRocker we have those personal conversations with you to talk about what does your specific schedule look like, and then provide you with guidance, more specific guidance for your particular situation. So that's something that, back to the original question of, should they take both? If you're starting early in 9th, 10th grade, it's probably good to have them take a practice test on either one of on both tests, just so you can get their immediate reaction on it. If you're later in the process, like 11th grade, and you're getting started like right now, you should be more concerned about how am I going to be able to fit this into my schedule to give myself the best chance to study for it. So that's generally how we would work. All right, so that kind of leads to those first two about when you want to start preparing and what and which test they should take. I think is the next important kind of jumping off point to how many times can my child take it. So there's no limit. The short answer is you can take it as many times as you want, and as many times as you can fit into your schedule. That being said, what we recommend is you take the SAT 2 to 3 times and the ACT about 2 times. Now, there's reasons behind that, right? So one of the questions that just came through on the chat is that, what is super scoring? So that's a parent who understands that this is a strategy that you can take when presenting your best scores. So on the SAT, there's a practice that most colleges and universities around the country adhere to called super scoring. And what that means is you can actually go sit for the test one time. Let's say you get a 600 on the reading and writing and a 600 on the math section. So what you can do is that next attempt, if I get a 650 on reading and writing and a 550 on math, I can then pair my 2 highest section scores to present my final score. So from the first attempt, I did better on math in the second time, so I got a 600. I'll carry that forward. And then for reading and writing, I did better on the second attempt and I got a 650. So I'm actually what the school's going to be evaluating you on is a 1250 rather than a 1200, which is what you would see on your score report for either one of those tests. So for the SAT, the reason why we recommend that it makes a little more sense to maybe add that third attempt in is because it's always in your favor. You can always, if you increase your scores, great. It's going by section. If you increase your scores by section, you're going to be able to present that higher score. Whereas on the ACT, it's really taking just your composite score, and if you're not familiar with the composite score, there are 4 sections on the ACT. They're all out of 36 points. So you would get, your scores, let's say you get a 30 on all 4. You average all 4 together. That gives you your composite score for the ACT. Most colleges to this point still take your best composite score from a single day. So it's a lot harder to get those score increases on your ACT in those cases because you need to raise everything and do just as well on each section as you did before on each attempt that you would take. So super scoring is one of those strategies that you definitely want to think about. And also an added kind of bonus to all of this is if you're going to college fairs or you're making college visits and meeting admissions officers, if you ask that question, what's your policy on super scoring for these tests? What you can do with that is, and honestly, it's best to do this in email form because what that does is create a record of your interest in the school, which what you'll find out from talking to college counselors and your school counselors, if you're working with independent counselors, just demonstrated interest is kind of the buzz term for this. That's really important to schools now that they're getting thousands and thousands of applications from all over the place. So when they're considering an application, they want to know that you're actually interested in going there. So if you've shown them and asked these questions, engaged with their admissions office in some way, or when you take your tests, you send your scores automatically to that school, those are all activities that qualify as demonstrated interest. So it can be a really positive thing and one of those kind of little steps that you can take to give yourself a better chance at admission. So something to think about. All right, so then that kind of leads to the next question, which is can I send multiple scores? And the answer is yes. What you can do and the way that it works is the SAT and the ACT provide you with a couple of opportunities to list schools on test day. So you would go in knowing school codes. That's a good prep activity to do before test day. Is know how many tests you can submit or how many scores you can submit to schools, and then knowing those schools' codes so that you can actually write them onto your name, the sheet where you're filling out your name and all of your personal information. So if you're sending scores to schools, that's sending it multiple times is fine. You don't need to necessarily show like on your first attempt. I don't want to send commonly. I hear from parents and students that I don't want to send my first attempt because I'm worried that they're going to see what that score was and immediately kind of write me off. That's not necessarily the way to go about that. So like I said before, that demonstrated interest piece, if you send them your first attempt, knowing full well that you're going to take it one or two more times, and then you improve on those scores to get into the ranges of what the school requires, that's going to look good on you. So that's something that you want to definitely, if you know that you're interested in those schools, take every opportunity to demonstrate interest in those schools because those will all add up, and this is just one piece of that that you can do. All right, so those are the first few questions that I wanted to get through, and I think I've got a couple backups here that we can jump into. Actually, I've got a question that just came through. How many months should it take my student to study for the ACT? He's in grade 10. So, great question. And again, this is a common question that we get about just prep in general, is how much time does it take? So usually what you'll see in prep options that are generally provided by the school or things that you've heard about from friends, most of them have this finite period of time that they work in. And it's usually like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12-week program where you're going to classes or things like that. Really, what we recommend you do is you shoot for getting to about 30 hours of study time over your entire process. So what that means is you can break that up. That's where we've seen the best results is when you hit that threshold. And what that means is however it works best into your schedule. So that's going to look a little bit different for everyone. And why, starting a few months in advance, that might be great, but if it's a really busy couple of months, then if you can't fit those hours in somewhere, it's not going to, the amount of months you have ahead of the test isn't going to make a difference. So what you want to think about is how much time you should be putting into prep, and that magic number is around 30 hours. Anything above that, you start getting into we're making drastic changes in my score, and I can really develop and add this into like a very formidable piece of my application to be competitive. So what you can do and what spreading that out allows you to do is incorporate summers. It allows you to incorporate those periods of the school year that may have a little bit more free time, like we talked about before. So those are what having someone that you can talk to about your specific situation is really helpful, and something that we've gotten fantastic feedback on from working with parents and students that, each circumstance is different, and to try to cookie cut everything is a little bit difficult and really not fair to you as you're trying to reach certain goals. So when you're thinking about these things, the earlier you can start, the better, and something that you can get that has extended, access to resources, where you can actually talk to teachers, or have engagement with a teacher, or instruction in general, is something that you want to look at and be wary of. I don't want to just put this into 6 weeks and just be cramming in 3-hour class sessions, where really to focus on something for 3 hours, you have to do that for this test. But when you're preparing and studying for it, it's probably not going to be as well received with students without, some kind of pushback and some amount of attrition that goes into that as well. So that's where, boot camps, great for getting practice in, and then these like long 3-4 hour classes, great for getting practice in, but how much you retain from that you can start hitting some diminishing returns after a certain amount of time. So why we preach the spread it out a little bit more and be more open to making this more of a regular piece of your homework as you're going through high school. And that kind of goes back to when are you taking these math classes that are applicable to the test? The sooner you can start supplementing what they're doing in class with what they're going to see on their SAT or ACT, the better. And that's something that, you shouldn't be spending a ton of money on providing that kind of thing over many years. You should find something that's a really good value to provide that support. Okay, so next question. Do SAT or ACT scores help with financial aid? And if a student gets a high score, can they get more money to pay for college? Yes and yes. What you'll find in this process is there are certain thresholds that schools dictate independently. So if I'm applying to school X and their average scores on the SAT are for their last class that they admitted are somewhere in the range of 1,200 to 1,350 or something. So it's a fairly competitive school, but that's generally what their students had from their most recent freshman class, which I'll get to in a second about how you can find that information. But when you're looking at those things, the higher you are on that scale for that particular school, knowing that each year they're kind of inching up, you want to be as high as possible on that scale, not only to help with your admissions, help with getting admitted, but if you're on the higher end of the average, you're more attractive to that school to keep around. And those are very easy metrics for admissions offices to look at and say, we're going to set a cutoff at this level. So, and if you reach that level, that means X amount more money in financial aid, or these grants become available at that point. So that's just from the school, in the school's financial aid packages. But additionally, outside scholarships, which you can search for all over the internet, there are so many scholarship opportunities that you can look for. Those generally, there are requirements. If you meet a certain level of GPA and test score, you become eligible for more scholarship opportunities. So ultimately, the higher your score is, the more money is going to be available for you. That's just a general rule that you can live by. So yeah, and back to the point I was talking about earlier about how to find these score ranges for schools that you're interested in. If you go to Google and put in the name of the school and followed by freshman profile and hit enter, the first return on that search, 9 times out of 10 is going to be the page on the admissions portion of the school's website that specifically gives you, here was average class rank, here was average GPA, here was average test scores, here were the kinds of things they were doing outside of school in extracurricular activities. So that's a really easy kind of search strategy that you can use as you're starting to create that college list, which it's never really too early to start that. And definitely something that I've found is a very easy way to get to that information fast. Okay, next question. So I know students who have taken more than 10 practice tests and not seen score improvements. Why would that be? And shouldn't their scores be going up each time? Yeah, so that's something it always I hate to hear that a student before we've worked with them has taken so many practice tests. One, because they're hard to schedule. You're dedicating 3.5 hours each time you do that. While it's great to get the actual feel for the test and something that you certainly need to do before you go in and take it for real, the vast majority of the time you have a set amount of knowledge already about the topics that are covered. So as a student, if I continue to do the same things over and over again without actually fixing the areas that I was getting questions wrong in the first place, I'm just going to continue those bad habits and continue to get those same things wrong. So you can only practice test yourself so far before actual instruction is needed, and like remedial work to understand those concepts actually becomes really important. And this is why, as you learn about test prep in general, the best results end up coming from people that work with private tutors. That's also the most expensive way to go and something that's not available for most people. But why that works so well is because that teacher is going in and figuring out where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then tackling those weaknesses to help turn them into strengths. So if you can do that, you're actually fixing the issues that you were having on those practice tests before. So we always, and this is something that we've made as a main pillar of what we do at TestRocker, is we want to provide you with instruction for every single question that we have you do on our program. And again, the reason for that is if I answer a question, I approached it in a certain way and I got it wrong, I need to figure out why that happened. So when we support that with instruction, and we do this through video on TestRocker, with these video explanations, what we're doing is showing you, okay, here's exactly how to work through this question. And you get access to that immediately after you've answered the question. So while it's fresh in my mind how I approach the question, I'm going to make those adjustments right then and there, which is also where having practice tests and having so many practice tests can be a bit it makes it a lot harder to make those adjustments, because if I just go through and do the writing section and I got number 12 wrong, after I've taken a 45-minute section, I need to go back and try to figure out where exactly how exactly I was thinking through that problem. You're less likely to be as clear on what you were thinking when you made that answer after you've done a whole bunch of questions at one time. So the immediate feedback on specific questions is something, again, that's a huge tenet of why private tutors are wildly successful in this realm. So, and something that is vastly important, and what makes those 20 to 30 point jumps on a practice by taking a bunch of practice tests, turn those into 200 point increases, because you're actually fixing the issues that you were having. All right, so I think that's going to be our time for today. This was great. Thank you all for sending the questions along. If you have additional questions, please send them through in the comment section right now. And what we'll do is we'll pick up where we left off on our next live session. Speaking of next time we do this, again, the whole point is so that we can help you make this process as easy as possible. So we're going to do these regularly, answering as many questions, any kinds of questions that you might have, even if it's specific to your situation. Happy to address those questions. But we just want to share our knowledge and also share it with anyone who might also have those questions, because we're here to help everyone, and try to make this process as easy as possible for you.